Let me share my screen. Again, welcome back, everyone. I'm George Banna, NARG Director of Policy and Program Development, and we have Tess. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Oh, you're on mute, Tess.
There we go. I am Tess Hembry, NARG's Director of Congressional Relations.
So yeah, we're here today. Again, appreciate the first session. That was lots of fun. Great idea, Michael, and all of PNRC. That's a lot of fun interviewing. We would now like just to talk a little bit about COVID-19 updates. We're going to do it from the congressional side, and I'm going to go through and touch on a few of the policy and process sides from the HUD perspective. But let's go ahead and let me make sure I have everything up and running here. Yep, I do. So again, I'm Georgie Banna, NARG Director of Policy and Program Development, and Tess Hembry. We are very happy to be here, always happy to be at PNRC and to share information with you guys. And again, like I said before, please reach out to us, and our contact information will be at the end of the slides, and we can find us there. But today we are going to, here we go. Nope, there we go. We got a bunch of stuff we want to cover today. I know we have a short amount of time, so we're going to just touch on a bunch of things. But again, always available for follow-up on things, and we'll see where we end up today, and we'll follow up with everyone. But with that, let me turn things over to Tess, so Tess can start on the congressional update.
Great, thanks, Georgie. I'm a Pacific Northwest native, like I said earlier in the morning, so I'm really happy to be here. I'm really glad to be talking to my fellow Pacific Northwesterners, and pretty sad that we're not seeing each other in person, but here we are. So diving into the congressional update, if you want to go to the next slide, Georgie. Perfect. So it's been a long 6 months or so of working with Congress, trying to make sure that you guys have the resources that you guys need. The first month of coronavirus, just to remind you of where we've been so far, we saw 3 different relief packages signed into law in pretty quick succession, and a pretty significant amount of congressional spending. So just from that perspective, it was pretty wild to see that amount of work and money out the door that quickly. But then sadly, since then, things have slowed down a little. So on March 6th, we saw the first bill pass through. It was $8.3 billion, which is relatively small as far as coronavirus packages are concerned at this point. And it was aimed largely at HHS and CDC, primarily to address the outbreak that you guys saw in Washington State and in California. Again, March 6th was pretty early in all of this, so that was done pretty quickly. The next bill was on March 18th. It was the Families First Act, and it was aimed primarily at things like testing, nutritional assistance, assistance for employers and unemployment benefits, a lot of the mechanics of how people live and work. Nothing in there for housing authorities, nothing in there for direct appropriations for HUD. That came on March 27th with the CARES Act, which I know a lot of you are pretty familiar with at this point. That was that big package out of Congress. It was $2 trillion in funding for direct aid to Americans. So it included those stimulus checks, the expansion of unemployment benefits, so the $600 a week. And then on top of that, there was about, I think it was like $12 billion for HUD programs. And some pretty broad emergency waivers for HUD, so that you guys both had the financial resources that you needed to address the new world of COVID, and the regulatory waivers to make sure that you could operate in a way that was safe for you, your employees, and for your residents. Since then, though, we've been a little stuck. Next slide, please. Perfect. So next, since the CARES Act passed in March, the conversation in DC is focused on what's next. At first, there wasn't necessarily an agreement on if something needs to come next. And if people did think that something needed to be next as far as the relief bill is concerned, there still was an agreement on if it was additional emergency assistance, or if we were going to have a conversation about transitioning into more of a recovery package. So something to address our immediate needs versus a long-term economic recovery, pulling us out of the economic impacts of COVID. So since then, we've seen 2 proposed packages. The House put forward the HEROES Act, and that was approved back on May 15th. The bill is $3.4 trillion overall, and that's an important point I'll come back to. So fairly large package, bigger than the CARES Act, and it includes a pretty significant amount of assistance for HUD programs. And then in addition to this, there is direct assistance for renters who are currently not assisted by HUD programs. So this package, it was approved back in May. And I do want to point out that this is a little bit different than what we saw with the CARES Act. So CARES Act was something that was debated, negotiated between House leadership, which is the Democrats, Senate leadership, which is Republicans, and the White House, again, Republicans. So they all came together and negotiated the CARES Act. And when it was put forward, it was a bipartisan package that had already, all the fine points had been worked out. The HEROES was a little bit different. This is probably primarily a political bill that came forward from Speaker Pelosi and the leadership of the House Democrats. Senate Democrats also had a hand in this as well, but again, they're the minority in the Senate. So this is more of a political bill. And so when it was initially introduced, Mitch McConnell, the majority leader in the Senate, said that this wasn't something that they were willing to consider. So that happened in May. Since May, we've been waiting for the Senate to take action. Whether that be put forward their own plan or work with the White House to come up with something joint with them or include the House. So basically just waiting for the Senate to do anything. Next slide, please. McConnell kept saying after the next recess, so after the Memorial Day recess, we were waiting, after the 4th of July recess, finally we got the HEROES Act. So this was a package that was put forward primarily from Senate Republicans. So again, another fairly political document. It's a combination of bills rather than one bill like the House was. It's $1 trillion overall. And we were very fortunate that there were a number of HUD programs that were included in this. Since that price tag was so much lower than the House bill, we were concerned that there wouldn't be any HUD funding. But they did include significant funding for housing authorities specifically as well. In addition to the funding, they also provided corporate liability waivers that would apply to housing authorities so that as you guys start to reopen or continue reopening or never closed, any liabilities that you may have with COVID that are above and beyond would be protected by this liability waiver. So that was the Senate. The House had the HEROES, and we're back to, perfect, yeah. So we have the HEROES, which is $3.4 trillion, and we have HEALS, which is $1 trillion overall. The Senate HEALS bill was introduced again after the 4th of July recess, and there was a lot of disagreement even within the Republican caucus of the Senate about this piece of legislation. There are deficit hawks who thought the $1 trillion price tag was too high. So even within the Republican Party, they didn't have agreement. So it never came to a vote on the Senate floor because you do need that 60 vote threshold. So not only did the Republicans need to keep all of their members, but they had to pull in some Democrats as well. And that wasn't going to happen. Mitch McConnell knew that going into it. And this was really an opening point for negotiations with Democrats. So again, a political bill, but at least it was a marker out there that we could work with. Next slide, Georgie. So since then, there was a lot of push to try to get something done before the August recess for a couple of reasons. One, that eviction moratorium lifted on July 25th, and then on July 31st, you saw the last of the $600 bonus checks for unemployment go out. So since then, it's really been a back and forth between the leadership of the House Democrats, leadership of the Senate Republicans, and the White House trying to come together on several things. So the big sticking point so far that we've seen is the overall price tag. Even that was a point of contention on Meet the Press over the weekend with Mark Meadows, who's the Chief of Staff of the White House, who's been working with Treasury Secretary Mnuchin on negotiations with Congress. The House did come down to an overall price tag of like $2.2 trillion, but it didn't sound like that was necessarily a point that was going to be workable for Republicans. So I think there's still some work to do on that overall price tag. Another issue has been in the unemployment insurance. That bonus did expire on July 31st, and since then you saw an executive order issued by the president that would give states the ability to apply for an additional, I think it was $300 per week if they are willing to kick in $100 of their own state revenues. So I think you've seen pretty much every state except for the District of Columbia and Nebraska or something like that, apply for that. I don't think it's Nebraska. Apply for that additional aid. So I don't know that it's necessarily been implemented in a lot of the states, but that relief is coming, although I do believe that it expires sometime in September, so that's short-lived as well. The liability protections, that's been a sticking point for Senate Republicans in particular. They want to see that included. State and local government assistance also has been a pretty political, controversial issue. Democrats want to ensure that state and local governments have additional resources because a lot of them have seen that tax flow, the tax base, interrupted throughout the COVID-19 crisis. Republicans don't want to provide additional funding to states that they see as being mismanaged prior to the COVID crisis, and so there's a bit of disagreement there. And then finally, more important to our issues is that the HEROES Act included assistance for renters who are currently unassisted by HUD and extended that eviction moratorium. The Senate bill didn't do either of those things. So there's a bit of contention there on those points. I will say that we've had some discussions with Senator Crapo's staff, who's the chair of the Banking Committee in the Senate. And he seems to think that there is consensus among Republicans that there is a need out there for some sort of rental assistance, whether it's through that unemployment bonus, whether the state and local government assistance can be used to provide that at a local level, or if there needs to be some sort of account created to directly provide renters with that assistance. They don't love the eviction moratorium getting extended, and they do seem to prefer some sort of cash payment to people in some form. So that's been good to hear that at least they recognize that there's renters out there that really do need that help. But just looking at the list of things that they need to come together on, it's a pretty significant amount of big ticket items. And from what I can tell, since the negotiations broke down a couple of weeks ago here in DC, they haven't really come together on any of these things. So heading into September, when Congress will reconvene after their August recess, there's a lot of things to work through. So like I said, Congress is coming back on September 8th, which is somehow already next Tuesday. March was like 10 years long, and all of a sudden it's like 2025 already. I don't know how that happened. But yeah, so August recess is done on September 8th, which is the Tuesday after Labor Day. They'll be coming back into DC to start to address some of these things. So the big question is there going to be a COVID-19 relief package before they adjourn again for the October recess, which will allow members of Congress to go campaign basically for their jobs? At this point, I don't know which way it's going to go because there are such significant points that they need to work through. There's a lot of need out there. I think there's a lot of will to get something done, but that existed before the August recess. So I'm pretty concerned at this point about the future of that relief package. One thing that I don't like that's getting thrown into the mix at this point is the fiscal year 2021 begins on October 1st. The House passed their transportation HUD bill before adjourning for the August recess, and the Senate hasn't even begun their appropriations process yet. So there's going to need to be some sort of a short-term spending bill passed by October 1st in order to avoid a government shutdown. So all of a sudden, the COVID-19 relief packages are now complicated by the fact that government funding just on a day-to-day basis ends on October 1st. I've heard some murmurs here in DC that those two things are going to get tied together legislatively. I'd prefer that not to happen because COVID-19 is such a hot button issue. But if fiscal year 2021 is must-pass legislation, which I would say it is, I hope everybody here in DC would say the same thing, then maybe COVID-19 actually does have a good chance of passing if it takes a ride with some sort of a short-term bill. So at the very least, we should see something pass in DC that has funding for HUD in some capacity by October 1st. And then, of course, hovering over all of this and significantly complicating the politics of everything we're talking about is the 2020 election, which is coming up in a couple short months. So 1/3 of the Senate, all of the House, and the executive branch is running for re-election right now. So that makes everything just extra political in a very political climate to begin with. So that's where we stand here in DC right now. Georgie, do you want to touch on a few HUD topics? Oh, and August recess, of course, the most important part. Thank you. So right now, we are still in the August recess. At NARO, we run an August advocacy campaign each August recess to try to get some attention drawn to housing issues when members of Congress aren't necessarily working on like the day-to-days of Congress and going to the Senate floor all the time for votes. And they're out of town, so their staffers actually have a chance to look at some of these issues, which is great. So the August campaign is run August 3rd, and it will end on September 8th when Congress returns here to DC. Our goal is to send 8,501 letters, which is one more letter than we sent last year. That number is, it's a pretty significant number of letters to send to Congress. So we definitely need your help getting the word out. We focused on 5 different topics throughout the 5 weeks of August recess. The first is COVID-19 relief, and that's something that we've asked our members and you guys to send every single day until there's a bill signed into law. So even though we'll be sunsetting the August recess campaign after September 8th, I'm still going to be pushing that COVID relief letter until something's signed into law. Universal voucher access, so making sure anybody who is eligible to receive a voucher does. Increasing affordable housing supply, so if we've got that many vouchers out on the street, you need units to put people in. Increasing access to resident services to ensure that everybody has the tools they need to be successful using these HUD programs. And then finally, this week, we just launched this morning a focus on the fiscal year 2021 transportation HUD funding, because that fiscal year is rapidly coming to an end. So PNRC, we're doing a regional competition between the 8 NARO regions, and I checked on Friday evening, and it looks like you guys were in 5th place overall out of the 8 regions. For a while, you had a dead tie going with the Pacific Southwest region, but you've edged ahead of them just slightly. So I definitely encourage you guys to send those letters. And one note about the letters, they're canned letters, and so I know that it feels like you're sending a letter into a void, and then you receive a response from the office that doesn't necessarily exactly address the concerns that you've raised, or it's a couple of days late and it feels just impersonal. So one thing I'd like to remind you is the letter that you're sending is pretty impersonal unless you've added personal details. So I think that's a fair response. But a couple of things that happen on the back end of those letters that you don't see from that canned response is, one, if they get enough letters on a specific topic in congressional offices, typically they will write a response letter on that topic. So in the past couple of years, we've seen when we send a letter on universal voucher access, we're getting letters back from congressional offices that actually address vouchers rather than HUD funding or housing. Like it used to just be something about mortgages or home ownership. Now they're writing letters about vouchers. And what that tells you is that you've sent enough letters to that office to make them think about vouchers and take a position on it. And that's a really, really powerful thing. And then on top of that, if you send enough letters to the office, it's they tally up the topics that they get the most letters on throughout the week. And things that come up with higher frequency, they actually address with the boss in meetings. So interns are reading your letters, but if they're getting 15, 20 letters on FY 2021 HUD funding, that's something that they're going to raise with the boss because that's not something they see every day. So it's really important that you guys do send those letters. I know sometimes it feels like they don't have an impact, but I can tell you they really do in congressional offices. So send those letters, help us get the word out. And thank you guys for all the work that you do, because I know a lot of you do a lot of work with congressional offices, and it makes my job a lot easier in DC. All right, now, Georgie, do you want to talk about HUD?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Tim.
Thanks.
All right, let's jump into a couple of the HUD pieces, and we'll jump around in topics a little bit. But again, they're all coronavirus related, COVID-19 related, and we're going to start from some of the pieces, some of the newer pieces. We're going to talk about some stuff in the recent past, and then we'll finish up with a couple of new pieces as well. But the return to operations, this is part of HUD REACT, the Real Estate Assessment Center. They're the ones that do your public housing inspections or your multifamily inspections. So this is your normal, where HUD sends a contractor out to do an inspection. HUD has started this return to operations program, which they want to start doing those inspections again. Again, back in March, they suspended all inspection operations. So there haven't been any REAC, UPCS, Uniform Physical Condition Standards, or any HUD inspections since March. So HUD wants to start that process back up. they're talking about really focusing on multifamily, but it does apply to public housing as well. And there could be times when public housing properties may be inspected. This is a timeline that HUD has set up. August 7th, a series of letters went out to housing authorities and across the country, and also HUD posted on their website information starting the clock. There's a 45-day clock that will be starting and I'll explain that in just a moment. That clock started August 7th. That clock runs then until September 21st. September 21st is the end of the 45-day clock. Then the 14-day notice that you normally would get would be issued. Then that 14-day runs until October 5th. So the earliest inspections can begin is October 5th. Now that's just over a month away from say again, that clock started early in August. Part of that clock is being in the green, low risk, and we'll show that in just a second. But you see the October 5th date where inspections can begin. The housing authorities that will be subject to inspection will be high-risk agencies, and we'll take a look at that, or require emergency inspections. It's been a problem, and so there's a reason why HUD needs to come out and do an inspection. Or you can choose as a housing authority to request an inspection if you're a troubled agency and want to get out of trouble status and it was because of an inspection, you can request that inspection. Arguably, all of this could have happened without this plan. HUD has these rights, even by suspending inspections. They can do emergency inspections and agencies can request inspections. The risk categories, though, are a key part of this. And there are 4 risk categories, green, yellow, orange, and red. As you can see on the screen here, I've listed what those mean. Green, again, is that most important. Agencies have to be in the green. This scale is developed by Harvard Global Health Institute, and it's less than 1 daily new case per 100,000 people on a 7-day average. So looking at the last 7 days, has there been more than 1 new case of coronavirus, COVID-19, per 100,000 people? So again, if you have 200,000 people, it's less than 2 cases. Okay, so it's again on a 100,000 people scale. So that's green. Anything higher than 1, you're 1 to 10 is yellow, 10 to 25 new cases is orange, more than 25 cases is red. So again, for HUD purposes, you need to be in the green to be inspected, and you need to be in the green for almost 60 days to be inspected, about 59 days. Here's the national map that HUD has on their website, on the REACT website, has this map. There's a national map, and this is the average for each state. As you can see, Texas, Georgia, Florida are in the red, US Virgin Islands in the red, more than 25 new cases per 100,000 people on a 7-day average. Up in the top left there, you see Alaska, Washington, Oregon. Alaska is orange, Washington, Oregon are yellow, and Idaho then is also orange. So they're in the medium and the medium high categories, but not in that red. As you can see, there is no state that averages green. There's 2 territories, American Samoa and the Northern Mariana Islands, but on the state side of things, no state. When this first came out, Vermont was green for a little while, and then Maine became green, but both have now gone into the yellow, into the second category. So what does that tell us? Actually, not a whole lot. The state data isn't telling us a whole lot of information because HUD is looking at the county level. So those are average of counties on that state map. Looking at the county level data, that is what HUD is going to look at to determine if agencies in that county can be inspected, or multifamily properties in that county can be inspected. Nationwide, there are only 66 counties out of 3,224 counties in the entire country that have been green for the 5 weeks HUD has been measuring. Again, the 5th week data just came out on Friday. Only 66. That number is going down. There were 86 that had 4 weeks of green. There were 122 that had 3 weeks of green. The number's going to, it's only 2% of counties. In PNRC, in the Pacific Northwest, there are 5 counties that are green for all 5 weeks out of 148 counties. Yeah. A little bit better numbers, actually 3.4%. 3 in Alaska, 1 in Idaho, and 1 in Oregon. No counties in Washington are in the green for all 5 weeks. And this is the data on the county level that HUD shares. There's an Excel spreadsheet link on the REACT page that lets you download your data. These are those 5 counties in the Pacific Northwest that are green for the 5 weeks. So again, the 3 in Alaska, the 1 in Idaho and Oregon, Wheeler County, Oregon, Lewis County, Idaho, Skagway, Alaska, Lake and Peninsula Bluerow, and then Huna and Goon, Alaska. So those are the only 5 in all of Pacific Northwest that can be on. And what does this mean? It means you're on a schedule to be inspected at October 5th. Does it mean it's going to happen? No, but you possibly could be. You're on that schedule because you're continuing to stay in the green. Now, which agencies, if these 5 counties go all the way through September, get their 14-day notices, get to October 5th, they stay green the whole time, which agencies in those counties or properties will be inspected? HUD will be focusing on the most critical. There's 5 criticality levels, 5 from most critical to least critical. So 5 is the highest, it'd be marked by a red. And if you've had a decertified inspector do your inspection, there's not many of these, there's a handful. They're spaced out across the country. If you've had a failed score, a score of less than 60, a trouble score of less than 60 on an inspection, or an overall unit score, just on the unit components, an average of less than 60, you'll be inspected. Or you had no date, no inspection prior, and you brought the units online. So those will be agencies that need to be inspected. So if you fit in the red, that's the best chance. So you have to be in green for the full 45-day and 14-day period, and then you also have to be in the red. If there's no red, they may go down to orange. HUD does not anticipate going down to green or black at any time soon. But again, it is a moving target. All of these have the potential to be inspected. So all agencies have a potential, but there are priorities in what they're going to inspect. There are not many housing authorities that meet the red most critical category. There are some multifamily properties that meet that. And that's, again, where HUD will be focusing most of the inspections. Please let us know if you get a 14-day notice for inspection, because that means you actually are in the inspection cycle. We'd like to know that so we know where that is happening. We don't anticipate many housing authorities getting one, but it is important to make sure that this is an inspection notice and the HUD will be coming to inspect if you receive that 14-day notice. Okay, just a reminder here too, if you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat. You can put those in, Tess and I can see those, and we can address those in the next few minutes. I do want to touch on a couple other pieces. I'll quickly go through waivers and remote video inspections. Let's do waivers. Again, HUD, the CARES Act allowed HUD to have statutory and regulatory waiver authority. And so those waivers came out in a notice, 2020-05, and an updated notice, 2020-13. We'll talk about some of the new waivers in just a moment, but you have a list of waivers now from HUD, both for statutory components and some regulatory components based on the authority from the CARES Act. You have full discretion to use or not use those waivers. We strongly suggest you use the ones that make the most sense to you, and then let us know how they work. If they're working good for you, or they're making your job easier, you're being more efficient, let us know. Those are the things we can go to HUD and go to Congress and talk about trying to make those permanent. Again, you have the full choice. There may be some alternative requirements as part of those waivers, and those alternative requirements are a floor. An example is an HQS, the Housing Quality Standards for the voucher inspection. It says if you're not going to do the HQS inspection, it doesn't just waive it and say you don't have to do anything. You do need to get an owner certification that the unit is decent, safe, and sanitary. That's a floor. You can do more, but that is the minimum that is required. A couple of new pieces, 2 public housing notices, waivers that are new. Designated housing plans, if you had one expiring during 2020, those have all been extended through the end of the year. So you don't have to do anything more past December 31st. HUD will continue reviewing those designated housing plan renewals. Self-inspection. Again, as a housing authority, you are required to do self-inspections of all of your units every year, 100% of units every year at the self-inspection, housing authority done inspections. You can waive that, you can adopt a waiver that would waive that through the end of the calendar year, 2020. Through December 31st, you can not do those inspections if you have not done those. You have to adopt that waiver. Also, if you adopt this waiver, HUD will not come out and do those inspections that we talked about in the return to operations as well. The voucher ones, there are 4 new voucher pieces. In the bottom 2, again, very specific program ones on FUP vouchers, your family unification vouchers, and child welfare referrals for foster care. Those have extended timelines. That's 11 and 12. 13 extends the timeline for voucher homeownership assistance. If a family's gotten to their 15th year for a non-elderly, non-disabled family, you can extend them 1 extra year because of COVID-19. And then project-based voucher contracts that have been at 0 HAP for 180 days normally expire or are terminated. These allow you to extend that through the end of the year and keep them on 0 HAP in case something happens through the end of the year. And so they can come back into the program without going through the application process. Okay, all waivers that were listed early on in 2020-05 that had an expiration date in July, there were a handful of expiration dates in July, were extended. They were all extended to the end of the year, December 31st. So some of them, again, some HQS ones had expiration dates of end of July. Those are extended. The only one that wasn't extended, it was a HUD waiver. HUD gave themselves a waiver for those designated housing plans, and they switched the waiver to extensions rather than giving HUD extra time to make decisions. So that makes sense. They just extended all designated housing plans. Okay. Yeah, I know we're going through this quickly, but again, if you have a question, feel free to drop those in the chat box. Remote video inspections. This is an alternative to an HQS waiver, Housing Quality Standards. This is a voucher program piece right now. HUD is discussing extending these out into public housing inspections, but that has not happened. A remote video inspection, sometimes called RVIs, you'll see RVI or remote video inspection, is a regular HQS inspection. It is not part of the waiver process. It takes the place of your normal in-person HQS inspection, except the inspector is sitting in his office or her office, and the person actually looking is a proxy. And that can be a tenant, that can be an owner, that can be a service provider that's in the unit, walking around with a handheld device, cell phone, tablet, and there's a video connection between the inspector and the proxy. The inspector is directing the inspection. They are telling the person where to point the camera. They are asking the person questions. Is the water, touch the water, is the water hot? The answer is no, that's the problem. If it's hot, that's good. So again, HQS is still a pass-fail inspection. The inspector on the other end of the phone is doing the inspection on the forms. Whether it's a paper form or a computer form, they are doing the inspection, not the proxy. Proxy is just the set of hands. It's the eyes, ears, and hands of the inspector, just in a different location. Okay. You do need a waiver. This is something you do need to adopt through your admin plan. And one of the waivers in 2020-05 was to be flexible in changing admin plans and emissions and key occupancy plans. You used to have to go through the board process. The waiver for admin plans in 2020-05 allows you to change your admin plan without an annual plan, without board approval, as long as you get that board approval later in the process. So you can change your plan, get a program up and running very quickly, and then go backwards and get the board approval another time. Now, that doesn't say do this without board consultation. Talk to your board. Make sure your board knows what's going on and you're all on the same page. If you are going to use RVIs, I would send a note to HUD at that email address on the screen there, isdv_RVI_users@hud.gov, just so they know who's using them so they can gather information on the process and make sure, because this is one of those pieces that right now is focused on COVID-19 inspections or during COVID-19 for inspections, but we do think this will stick around after COVID-19 when things go back to normal, whatever that means. RVIs should still stick around, and that we're going to push for that because this is an added flexibility. Though in the future, and even right now, you can do in-person inspections or remote video inspections. Either one count the same. There's no waiver for inspection based there. Okay, either one is an inspection of record. Scheduling inspection, all very similar to what you normally do. The RFCA, the request for tenancy approval, remains the same. You get that from your tenant for a new, and you have to go out and do your inspection within 15 days. In-person or RVI, all the same. Okay. HQS inspection will do the inspection via video. That streaming platform, HUD does not require any certain platform. It can be FaceTime, it can be Zoom, it can be go to webinar, go to meeting, it can be Skype, anything that works for the housing authority and the proxy. Okay, again, it is an inspection of records. Make sure that one thing that does come into play is, does the proxy have the equipment to be able to do an inspection? When they're testing outlets, electrical outlets, do they have the equipment to be able to test if it's grounded or wired properly? Many housing authorities that have adopted RVIs have created almost a go bag, in a sense, an inspection bag, where they provide the thermometer for the water, a plug out, an outlet checker, tester for the outlets. So that's something they drop off the day before the inspection and pick up the day after the inspection. But the person in the unit, whether it's the owner, the tenant, can then use that equipment to follow the inspector's orders and requests during the inspection. So again, there will be an agreement. All these procedures and processes do need to be adopted by the housing authority. How they work with your current inspection process. What's the information? Make sure you have some form of agreement between the housing authority and the person with possession of the unit, whether it's the tenant or the owner, just so so everyone knows is on the same page on how that process will go. HUD is working on sample documents for this. There has been a little bit of updates in the latest FAQ, frequently asked questions from HUD on the coronavirus discussion, but we do see HUD has talked about having standalone guidance on RVIs coming very soon, and hopefully we'll share that once we get that as well. This is new. This is something HUD is learning on the fly. This is something housing authorities are learning on the fly. We want to make sure to try to use as much as possible, but also where everyone is learning from the process during this new and exciting time for inspections. The last piece I want to touch on in the last few minutes here before we go to your questions. And again, if you have any questions, Tess and I are more than happy to address those here at the end of the session. Just go to the chat, type in your question, make sure you type it to everyone or myself or Tess so we can make sure we can see it. But finally, I do want to talk about eligible uses of the funding. CARES Act funding, Tess talked about that funding we got originally back starting in March, and then it took time for HUD to issue that funding. And that funding was both for public housing dollars, and there's also voucher dollars. So public housing dollars, there was money for operating, which could also be used for capital because those funds are interchangeable right now. Then there's also funds for voucher program, both for the admin fee, the administrative fees, and for HAP dollars. And the HAP dollars are the newest funds, the latest funds to be released. And we'll talk about that right at the end here. Let's talk public housing first. PIH Notice 2020-07 released all of the public housing dollars, about $685 million. All those funds were sent to housing authorities and made available to housing authorities to be able to draw down for immediate use, is what HUD said there. Those dollars are interchangeable between operating and capital fund. If a capital fund that needs additional funding, you can use that money for it. If you have maintenance needs, it can be used for that. This is an eligible activity slide here. Any activity that was eligible previously under operating fund or capital fund, any normal operating fund or capital fund expense is an eligible expense. You can use it for any normal eligible operating or capital fund expense. On top of that, you have other expenses related to preventing, preparing for, and responding to coronavirus. HUD was very flexible here in the coronavirus pieces as well, in that you as a housing authority have to,